This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about a system that discovered quietly, all at once, that it no longer controls the things that keep it alive. Not the streets, not the money, not the flow of information. What you're watching is not chaos. It only looks like chaos when the map you're using is already obsolete. Because when a modern state loses the ability to see its own people, to speak to them, or to contain them, something irreversible begins. And it doesn't begin with collapse. It begins with silence in the wrong places and noise where power assumed there would never be any. Stay with me. Because the danger here isn't the fire you can see. It's the invisible systems that failed first and what happens next when they don't come back online. And to understand that, we have to move away from the images and look at who actually controls the system now. What actually matters here is not who is shouting the loudest or who appears strongest on camera. That's the distraction the system depends on. Real control in a modern state lives somewhere else. It lives in infrastructure, in coordination, in the quiet assumption that tomorrow will function like yesterday. For years, power rested on a simple bargain. The state controlled movement, money, and communication. In exchange, people adapted. They waited, they endured. But that bargain only works if control is continuous. If it never blinks, if it never has to improvise, what we're seeing is not a rebellion against authority. It's authority discovering that its tools no longer obey. Roads stop being roads. Money stops moving where it's told. Information finds routes the system was never built to monitor. This is why personalities suddenly don't matter. Because when systems fracture, leaders don't decide outcomes. They react to them, and once reaction replaces control, events start choosing their own direction. That's the frame we need. Because the most dangerous changes don't announce themselves loudly. They arrive quietly, and by the time they're visible, the shift has already happened. Which brings us to the part no one noticed at first. The change that didn't feel like change at all. For a long time, this system trained everyone to expect pressure, not rupture. Crackdowns, sanctions, shortages, temporary outages that were never supposed to be permanent. Before, disruption was an event. Now, disruption became the baseline. Before, control meant visibility. The state saw everything, tracked everything, filtered everything. Silence was something it imposed. Now silence shows up where authority needs noise most, and noise appears where silence used to be guaranteed. This shift didn't arrive with an announcement. It crept in through workarounds, through adaptations, through people learning slowly how to function without permission. What changed wasn't courage, it was expectation. People stopped waiting for restoration. They stopped assuming systems would be fixed. They began planning around failure instead of fearing it. That's the most dangerous transition any power structure can face. Because repression only works when people believe order will return. Once that belief dissolves, control becomes theatrical. Force becomes reactive. And authority starts chasing momentum instead of directing it. This is the moment analysts miss because it looks calm on paper. But it's the exact point where systems stop recovering and start accelerating. And acceleration always produces a test. A moment where stress concentrates into something visible. That test is where this story turns. What happened next wasn't spontaneous, and it wasn't symbolic. It was mechanical. At a precise moment, the system reached for the switch it always reaches for. The one designed to make everything go quiet, to isolate, to slow time. And for a few minutes, it worked. Connections dropped, signals vanished. The digital map went dark. That move wasn't about control. It was about buying space. Darkness, historically, is where force feels safest. But this time, the silence didn't hold. Information kept moving. Images escaped confinement. Coordination didn't collapse, it rerouted. And on the ground, something else happened at the same time. Crowds didn't scatter, they concentrated. Roads stopped behaving like infrastructure and started behaving like barriers. Security protocols met arithmetic limits. They weren't built to survive. This wasn't protest as expression. It was pressure applied to specific arteries, and suddenly the system was exposed to a risk it had never fully priced in. What happens when isolation fails and visibility turns against the state? Because once that door opens, it doesn't close gently. To understand why that moment mattered, you have to look beneath the smoke, past the crowds, past the images, because systems don't collapse when people get angry. They collapse when incentives flip. Here's the mechanism. Power assumed disruption could be localized. That pressure would stay emotional, not operational, but the moment movement, communication, and labor synchronize even loosely, the cost shifts. Suddenly, enforcement isn't just political, it's financial. Every unit deployed drains resources. Every interruption compounds loss. The people applying pressure don't need to win. They just need to persist. And the damage doesn't fall evenly. Those at the top retain exits, liquidity, absence. The absorption happens lower. Delayed pay, fuel shortages, equipment without maintenance, orders without compliance. That's how benefit and burden separate inside a failing system. Control becomes expensive. Non-cooperation becomes cheap. And once that equation flips, force stops being decisive. It becomes unsustainable. This is why the response accelerates, why pressure increases instead of stabilizing. Because the system isn't choosing escalation. It's being pushed into it. And when that happens, the next shock never comes from where planners expect. It comes faster, closer, and with far less warning. Everything speeds up here. Shorter windows, less coordination, more risk. The response hardens, not because it's effective, because it's familiar. Units move without certainty. Orders travel slower than events. Decisions are made with partial information and full fear. On the streets, pressure doesn't disperse. It fragments, then recombines somewhere else. Vehicles stop moving, facilities stop functioning. Assets designed to intimidate become obstacles to maneuver. This is where myths fail. The myth of unlimited capacity, the myth of instant compliance, the myth that force scales cleanly. It doesn't. Every attempt to reassert control creates new points of friction. Every visible failure invites imitation. And inside the system, something more dangerous begins. Hesitation. When enforcement pauses, even briefly, authority bleeds. Not publicly, internally. People start calculating exits, not just physical ones, institutional ones. Because at this stage, survival isn't ideological. It's logistical. And once that calculus spreads, the system enters a zone it cannot command. Only react. This is the moment that looks like strength on the surface and weakness underneath, and it's about to reach the people who were told they'd never feel it. This is where it stops being abstract and becomes personal, because systems don't fail in theory. They fail in kitchens, at pay windows, at empty taps, at screens that don't load. You feel it when routines break, when prices stop making sense, when services become conditional instead of guaranteed. You are not watching history from the outside here. You are watching the moment when ordinary life becomes contingent on access, on timing, on whether the system still recognizes you tomorrow. This is the quiet cruelty of systemic failure. It doesn't arrive as a single catastrophe. It arrives as accumulated friction, waiting longer, paying more, trusting less. And once people internalize that shift, compliance evaporates. Not loudly, gradually. This is why fear stops working, because fear assumes there is something stable left to lose. Stay with me, because what happens next doesn't stay contained. These failures don't respect borders, they propagate. And once they do, the story stops being local entirely. Once systems lose containment, they don't fail inward. They radiate outward. Supply chains don't ask permission before reacting. Energy markets don't wait for clarity. Allies don't sit still while uncertainty compounds. What looked internal starts showing up elsewhere in delayed shipments, in recalculated risk, in suddenly fragile assumptions that held entire regions together. Dependencies that were manageable under stability become liabilities under stress. Routes narrow. Backups disappear. Margins evaporate. And the ripple isn't symmetrical. Some actors feel it immediately. Others feel it later but harder. This is where outside powers stop theorizing and start modeling scenarios. Not because they want collapse, because they have to prepare for it. When a node like this destabilizes, it doesn't just remove itself from the system. It distorts everything connected to it. That distortion creates pressure to act, or to hedge, or to disengage. And none of those choices are neutral. The danger now isn't intervention. It's miscalculation. Because when uncertainty spreads faster than information, decisions get made with incomplete maps. And that's when local failures turn into global accelerants, which leaves us with the question everyone avoids until it's unavoidable. What happens next when the acceleration can't slow down? From here, the system has only a few directions it can move. Not outcomes, directions. The first is adjustment, a partial reset, selective concessions, enough functionality restored to slow momentum without reversing it. This path buys time, but time is not the same as control. The second is erosion. No dramatic collapse, just continued degradation, more workarounds, less trust, a state that still exists